everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Augmenting the Patient Experience with Remote Care at Home. I'm Angie Stewart with Modern Healthcare Custom Media. I'd like to thank Bioformis for sponsoring and participating in today's broadcast. With a connected technology platform, Bioformis partners with health systems and risk-bearing organizations to revolutionize the delivery of remote care at home across the continuum. Bioformis is bringing the right care to everyone, everywhere. Today's webinar will feature audience Q&A at the end of the hour. To submit your questions, enter them in the chat feature and press send. In the meantime, if you'd like to test out the feature, go ahead and send in the chat what your favorite color is, and we'll get it rolling there. With that, I'm excited to introduce our presenters. First, we have Dr. Sarah Pletcher, System Vice President and Executive Medical Director for Strategic Innovation at Houston Methodist. Next, we have Amber Fensel, Senior Vice President of Digital Health and Engagement and Chief Digital Health Officer for Novant Health. Also joining us today is Claudia Douglas, Principal of Health Transformation for PwC. And finally, we have Dr. Justin Hubbard, Vice President of Product Management for Bioformis. It's really great to have you all. I'm excited about today's very important discussion, and we're going to hear about how health systems are embracing remote care delivery to confront their top challenges head-on and improve patient and staff experience. During this next 45 minutes or so, our discussion will be structured around three key components. First, adopting home-based care delivery. Second, monitoring key metrics. And third, evolving for future success. So first, let's dive in with brief introductions from our presenters. To get us started, I'd like to hear from each of you just a bit about your role and your organization. So we'll hear from everyone, but we'll start with Amber, then Sarah, then Claudia, then Justin. Take it away, Amber.
Thank you, Angie. I am Amber Fensel. As Angie mentioned, I'm our Chief Digital Health Officer at Novant, and also oversee our virtual care capabilities, our enablement capabilities as it all relates to digital health technologies, albeit inside of the four walls or outside.
Great. Sarah?
Hi there. I'm from rural Michigan. I'm a surgeon by training. I've got over 35 years experience stirring up trouble by building programs that take advantage of either innovative tech or a mindset or just a way of doing things to hack the delivery and experience of healthcare. So that's been a lot of things: virtual, monitoring, patient flow, digital, AI, stealing examples from retail, hospitality, manufacturing, anything I can put my hands on to make things work better. And I'm based in Houston at Houston Methodist. It's a premier nationally recognized system, part of the Texas Medical Center, the largest in the world. And I'm excited to be joining you today.
Great. Great to have you. Claudia, let's hear a bit about yourself and your role.
Sure. Thanks, Angie. I'm Claudia Douglas. I'm a principal with PwC in our Provider Transformation Group. I've spent 15 years in consulting, but also 15 years in industry as an executive in strategy and operations for large health systems, where we're focused on transitioning towards value. A key component of these projects is the use of technology to improve care outcomes, and working with people like Dr. Pletcher and Amber and the team. One thing we really try to make sure is that we're improving quality, we're improving experience of not only caregivers, but also consumers, and trying to keep people as consumers and individuals versus patients, and working on the cost of care for the quadruple aim and serving the population of those served. So excited to be here today on this esteemed panel.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Justin, let's hear about you.
Sure. Justin Hubbard. By background, I'm an MD informatics trained physician, transitioned into more industry immediately after that fellowship. I am focused on product management here at Bioformis, so lead the product management team. Bioformis is an organization that believes the walls of organizations are going to extend to deliver care at the bedside in the patient's home, and we aspire to assist organizations to support them in that transition.
Great. It is fantastic to have you all here. I think we have a group of very comprehensive knowledge and expertise, so this will be a really engaging and insightful conversation. My first question that I have, I'll direct to Sarah and Amber. So, utilization of remote patient care, hospital at home programs, remote patient monitoring, chronic disease management, these have skyrocketed over the last few years. So, how have your organizations adopted home-based care delivery, and how have those offerings evolved over time? Sarah, let's hear from you first.
Sure. I mean, yes, of course, we all got a huge boost from the pandemic, but for those of us in the space, telemedicine and virtual has been around for over 100 years. I think here we don't focus on the home as one particular setting, but recognize that care and expertise can be accessed at home or at work or at your kid's hockey rink or on vacation or in a nursing home or in a hospice setting. And so we really focused on investing in programs and in capabilities. So in terms of our virtual portfolio, that can include everything from on-demand video visits, text, all the way to care in the ICU or the emergency department. And in terms of capabilities, we've really looked for tools and platforms and teams and partnerships that allow us to centralize, remoteify, automate, smartify, streamline anywhere and any way that we can, looking to thread those through the patient journey in any setting. We recognize, of course, that the home is a very important frontier and requires a special set of logistical capabilities, but we're really focused on serving the patient wherever they are.
That's great to hear. We might hear some similar things from Amber. What do you have going on at Novant Health in terms of adopting home-based care delivery and the evolution over time?
Very similar experience and journey as Dr. Pletcher described for herself and for Houston Methodist. Telehealth is not new. We have been offering telehealth visits in a video platform at least since 2013. But due to COVID, prior to COVID, we had around 2,400 total video visits over the course of 6 years. And since, like everyone, it has skyrocketed. Last year, we did around 411,000 virtual visits alone in a variety of modalities. So it's become the new normal. Now, really what we are focused on is as Dr. Pletcher described, meeting the patient where they are. So perhaps it's at home, and home can represent a lot of locations physically, but we just think of it as alternative sites of care and building a hybrid care model so that the journey for a specific treatment plan can be at the place of most convenience by way of the patient or even for the caregiver or even the provider. So if it's a care journey that requires some in-person and can have some virtual options, perhaps that doesn't matter. It's what's best for that particular situation and certainly for that patient. I think what is most interesting is what I have called the 3 C's, and it's the influence of the traditional historical healthcare point of view and the conservatism that existed there in a large sense prior to COVID. So one of the blessings of COVID is opening the doors and eyes of what is possible in a variety of modalities. The other C is consumerism. So all of us are not only patients, but we are consumers out in the marketplace, having experiences outside of healthcare that are being expected inside of healthcare. And the challenge for us in digital health is how do we deliver that to meet their expectations, but also remain compliant and safe and deliver high quality. And that's a very tight rope to walk. And then lastly is in my mind, confidence. We as systems have become confident in our ability to deliver care in non-traditional settings, such as the home, such as any alternative site of care. And I think that the confidence varies by system, and those systems who have embraced it and have a guiding principle of purposeful innovation are those who will excel in this space to to find those truly optimized and ideal mechanisms to integrate into that workflow for the care team, and then certainly to deliver that high quality outcome for the patient.
Yeah, it's a really great framing of it, the 3 C's, and I'm glad you brought in that confidence component. I think we have a lot of people in the audience today who've attended because they're looking to gain that confidence and really bolster these programs. So part of that bridges us to my next question here. So what were the key metrics that your organization considered when deploying a remote care program, and how did this differ from competing initiatives? Sarah and Amber, I'd like to stay with you for this one to hear more about that journey. Sarah, could you weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, first off, your metrics, you need to start with what's the overarching strategy at the highest level of the organization. Like, what are you trying to accomplish? And then once your programs are aligned with that, the metrics are going to be a little bit different for every program based on the setting, the population, what you're trying to achieve. But I do think it's important when you're trying to stand these new things up to recognize that you kind of need to shift a little bit based on the love language of your ROI stakeholder, and whether they're more interested in hearing about all the staffing costs you're going to save, or the quality and value you're going to deliver, or the patients that we're going to acquire as new patients into our system. And the great thing in doing these programs, and Amber used the word convenience, one of the things I love about convenience is it's good for everybody. Doesn't matter if you're social determinant, urban, homeless, or busy working executive, or you're the care provider, convenience is good for everyone. But how you highlight the benefit of your program does need to shift a little bit based on who you're trying to convince. So I think that's an important thing to remember with your metrics. You're always going to want your volume, your metrics. You're always going to want to talk about experience and satisfaction, but then you're going to need to pivot it a little bit depending on who you're trying to get in the boat.
Absolutely. Amber, what's your take on this question and the metrics that you considered in deploying?
I concur with much of what Dr. Fletcher offered. Additionally, from my point of view, there are always an assumed set of KPIs, the reduced readmissions, ED avoidance, those that are recurring themes. The double clicking into that and really understanding in a particular use case, if in fact there is a material impact to that particular metric, is the challenge. It's very easy to highlight in broad brush that we're going to reduce our readmissions and we're going to impact the savings in our value-based plans. Proving that for your financial counterparts and your executives to support that program that you are proposing is really difficult. And so therefore, looking particularly at each use case in its own unique manner, you'll find that there are very unique KPIs. That's at least what we have identified. If we're looking at our higher acuity advanced care at home financial model, the things that we are measuring there as a benefit, as a revenue stream, or as a savings looks very different than the business case that we have built for our outpatient remote patient monitoring program. And even inside of that RPM program, based on the service line and the use case, the KPIs are different. So it's not cookie cutter. And in order to really tell a compelling story, I encourage you to peel back the onion a few layers to really find out what is a tangible impact to measure and what matters most in that particular use case. Because it really does vary. And there are some of those metrics when you look at savings from a value-based care and lowering the cost of care. We all hear that and know that. Any of you who have tried to sit down with your payer analytics teams and your finance partners to actually crunch that number, it's really hard. It's like this magical number that has 50 different variables and all the levers to pull. So I encourage you to perhaps look for a different one. and the uniqueness of your use case will lead you to what is most meaningful to measure. And that will resonate.
Absolutely. And on that thread, we've kind of circled around this a bit. Was there a particular patient population that you initially targeted with your programs, either you, Amber, or Sarah, at your respective organizations? And to demonstrate ROI, did you establish any goals that were low-hanging fruit that could be met really quickly? Amber, to your point of really pulling back those layers.
I mean, I'll just say during the pandemic anyway, I joined the organization in April of 2020. It was less low-hanging fruit and more like fruit ninja asteroids. You were just trying to get tools and platforms out there to maintain access to our patients, whether patients at home or trying to extend ICU level capability to a stand-up unit that we just had to turn around overnight, kind of thing. So a very unique landscape for sure. I think in terms of populations, we had all the tools out there to support patients trying to access care from home. So we invested a lot in the hospital. A lot of the hospital programs that I mentioned, virtual nursing, we stood that up just in the last year. We're going in on our 100,000 encounters. And in terms of really focusing on goals, we really looked at what services is that solution going to provide, and what's that going to give. And instead of getting into the old think of ratios and number of people per unit, it was like services and what time can we give back to the bedside, and what are some of the things they can do with that time, and how much sooner can we get patients home, and with better information that involves their family, because we're porting them all in to do the discharge together. So a better experience for the patient, but getting them home sooner on a length of stay side. So back to that, like finding what different people want to hear. It's one program. We look at all the metrics, but we can tell you why that's good for the bedside nurse using certain metrics. We can sell that to the patient using metrics aimed at them. We can tell you why that's better for pharmacy. We can tell you why that's better for the surgeon discharging the patient. Their office is not going to get the follow-up phone calls because we actually made sure the prescriptions went to the right pharmacy. You can really look all around that program and find metrics that impact different stakeholders. But at the core, it's what are we doing and how long does it take, and what's it getting for us?
Yeah. Amber, anything to follow on with that?
A few additional thoughts. The patient population I have come to appreciate certainly matters if we're looking at higher acuity inpatient, advanced care type of scenarios and offerings versus an outpatient and lower acuity. It also is very distinct by market. So what we have as a patient population need or trend in our Winston-Salem market, we're based in the Carolinas. If we're looking at Winston-Salem and the patient population there is heavily MA and over 65, when I look at our patient population in Charlotte, it's different. It's not predominantly MA and 65 and older. It's quite diverse. So therefore, the programs that we design often will be even unique to a market because there's a higher need in one market versus the other. The other nuances are where are we seeing the greatest need, and then identify the right level of additional monitoring or alternative site of care capability that would really move the needle. One of the use cases that we have in play right now and are experiencing great success is with our hypertensive OB patients. We offer remote patient monitoring to those identified patients that fit their profile and criteria. We move them into the program, and we are seeing real results compared to the baseline population prior to receiving any additional support and care. And for example, we've had 8 patients already, and the program is less than a year old, that were identified in the early onset symptoms of preeclampsia. So we were able to intervene and avoid an adverse event before it occurred. Those are the types of uniquenesses in patient populations that we are looking for, a particular profile, a particular level of risk, and where we're seeing trends to go after a population and really move the needle versus a broad.
Absolutely, and congratulations on that success. That's really impactful results. And like Dr. Fletcher said, you kind of have to take these results and present them in so many different ways for the love languages that different stakeholders have. So really great things there. Claudia, Justin, you've been really patient. I'd love to bring you into the fold here. I know your gears are turning with what we've heard so far. My next question is around some of the challenges. So we've talked about the strategy and the metrics, but obviously this is not an easy path. There are hurdles. So I'd love to hear, Amber and Sarah, what are some challenges your organizations have faced while implementing and operationalizing remote care options? But also Claudia and Justin, to pull you in here, are there any additional challenges you've observed from partners in implementation of remote care programs? So I'd love to stay with Amber for this one and then move to Claudia, and then I'll take it to the other two.
Thanks, Angie. I've given this one some thought, and I land on, and I was actually just speaking of this earlier today with a colleague, that the greatest light bulb for me in implementing a very successful and functional digital, the appreciation for the integration into operational workflow. And it sounds obvious, but we're talking about clinical operational workflow, and that is extraordinarily different and complicated, as I have come to appreciate. Therefore, folks like Dr. Hubbard and your informaticians and your counterparts being folded into designing a workflow that is truly integrated, it's optimized for the care team, and then also providing an experience and solution for the patient that is desirable is not easy. It is difficult, and there are a myriad of complications that you have to consider. And so I would suggest, from my point of view, getting that integrated clinical workflow nailed with that digital solution in such a way that it is embraced and optimized, it's used, it's desired by the care team is paramount.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really getting it integrated seamlessly into the workflow is key, it sounds like. Claudia, I'd love to hear your perspective on challenges, but also advice for overcoming those key obstacles.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Angie. Totally aligned with what Sarah and Amber have been saying. I think one of the big things that I've seen is really tying this to your beliefs. You need to really tie to your organizational, where your organization believes care is moving or where it needs to move. And I've seen disconnects where people might shake their heads and say yes, but if they are not on board and you don't have that alignment across the organization, you're going to have challenges, no doubt about it. They will come up in weird ways, but it's like whack-a-mole. And so really making sure that you spend that time on the front end, making sure that your board's aligned, anyone in the executive team, people out in the field, everyone needs to be singing to the same hymnal, if you will. And if you're not, you're going to see that. So that's one big thing. I also think keeping momentum alive is really important. Sarah and I were at something earlier this year where I think the analogy, Sarah, was change is like air in a balloon, and when it deflates, you got to make sure you're on top of that. So thinking about keeping that balloon full of air throughout the journey, because people get tired. This is hard work, and change is hard. So keeping that balloon full of air and that momentum alive, and having those informal as well as your formal champions out there. Those informal champions are crucial, and the closer to the patient, the better. In your informal champions, breaking down silos. So making sure on the front end that you're working, I worked with a large health system that had 150 hospitals on a program, a hospital at home program, deep clinical protocols, revising those inpatient to be for the ambulatory inclusion, exclusion criteria, how close a caregiver, a family caregiver had to be to the home, all kinds of different metrics, like we were talking about earlier around that. And it took us a few months because we really wanted to make sure we heard from all the different people in the organization. You've heard pharmacy coming up, imaging lab. How are you going to do labs at home? How are you going to make sure it's aligned with everything that's going on in your organization and CLIA, and so on and so forth? So how are you going to really execute this in a regulatory way that's compliant? And so thinking about getting all those different stakeholders, and I know it can be challenging, but if you don't get that alignment, things will come up when you go to pilot. Things will come up when you go to roll out further. So making sure that you have that leadership involvement, that front staff line involvement, and it's tied to your beliefs, and people feel like they belong, and you don't have the silos as you build your programs and execute them.
Absolutely. That's such a key point. It's a lot of legwork to get this alignment, but it's absolutely imperative. You can't move forward without it. You can't have success without it. Justin, I'd love to hear from you. Do you have any similar or maybe different viewpoints on what the biggest challenges are in standing up remote care programs?
Yeah, I think, Claudia, just to echo some of those things, we think about this as not just technology. And if you think through that lens that this is a technical solution that you're going to apply to the workflows you already have existing, there'll be a miss. And so we think about this similar to how Claudia does, that we're coming in to assist with the development of these programs, whether that's rolling out additional kind of care pathways that are independent from the care pathways that you're already doing within the hospital systems, whether that means integrating in-home services that you may not have partnerships today and facilitating those conversations. We think through kind of the whole solution lens and less through kind of the technology piece independently.
Absolutely. Sarah, any challenges from your perspective that are really the biggest maybe drain on resources or energy?
Yeah, I mean, to take it really high level, it's the complexity. It's the complexity of the new, right? Like, this is a new market. There's a bajillion devices. You got to think about data differently. You got to think about legal, regulatory, reimbursement. How do you support tech? And then people forget about the complexity of the old, workflows, process, pathways, handoffs, protocols, and logistics. Like, just the integration and delivery logistics of this new world are non-trivial. And I think people send someone to a conference and they get excited about a widget and don't think about, again, boring stuff like supply chain and service experience and how many clicks and how many forms people have to fill out, and will they see 4 different privacy disclosures. And I think that's a really important piece. And then when you think of those 2 complexities, then it's a challenge of having the right skill sets to manage the new complexity and to deliver the old complexity. And it's where you really have to think about your strategic partnerships broadly. You're not just shopping for tech, you're shopping for service delivery partnerships to fill in the skill sets that you might not already have and aren't going to be able to get fast enough to keep pace.
Claudia, I'm seeing some nodding around the skill set. What is resonating with you about that? If you could chime in. Yeah,
sure. Sarah's spot on, and it's a different skill set, right? And I think really tying to what we all know we're having huge workforce challenges, right? Especially in clinical staff, but also support staff. And what is going to really help this person tick? Because as people go through their lives, different things obviously make them happier, right? Maybe when you're younger, you're more motivated by monetary aspects, but really drilling into how can we keep this nurse with us? Is this nurse going to be happier if she can work or he can work at home because they have children or they have a crazy work schedule, with their parents taking them to different appointments. So how do you pull that out and then have them be aligned to this? So, we've seen people, different shifts, working from home, be attracted to them. It's a different piece and it's a different skill set. I have a best friend who's a nurse practitioner. She's worked in our local market at Libyan Children's Hospital. She's also been in care companies where she comes into the home and does hospital at home. She's now doing clinical trials for pharma, and really thinking about that served her well in different points in her life. So thinking about how that will keep people engaged and will stem some of the turnover. We're seeing, I think the latest stat from Politico is 200,000 nursing shortage in the future. So how do we really think about what will keep people with you and in what way, and what training we need? The training manual we did on this care at home program, and what I like to call hybrid connected community care now, because it could be hospital at home, but it also could be what Justin was talking about, chronic care management. What is in that playbook, and how do we really train people? And those logistics, like Sarah was saying, are not trivial at all. If you are ready, and let's say it's a hospital at home and you're taking somebody either as a direct admit or someone from an ED, and that equipment isn't going to be at home at the right time when the caregiver's there, you've got a major bump, and it's hard to overcome that. I actually had a situation where we had put on some RPM equipment, and we were all ready. We had all the protocols, but for some reason that one day, that monitor didn't work on the cardiologist, and the program got delayed for months because they didn't feel comfortable. Was the tech going to work? So those are just some things thinking about out loud. That you have to make sure you're testing and that you're ready, because if you have one bump, it can delay it for a while. And then I've seen some super successful ones where, we haven't had some of those issues, but you have to make sure you're factoring all of that in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think one of the exciting things about all of this is that, using whether it's RPM or virtual nursing, in terms of workforce, these solutions are not just a treatment, they're also a cure, in that you deliver these services, it helps the bedside legacy teams do their work. But in creating those programs, you offer opportunities for them to have more flexibility, work seasonal, work short shifts, work at night, work from their vacation house, so you extend careers, you prolong and retain your staff. So you're providing them a service in their existing detail, but then giving them a career path to optimize and enlighten what they're doing. So it's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about all these care programs, is thinking about how we can innovate how we hire and staff them.
That is such a fabulous point. I love that we're talking about this in terms of the healthcare worker journey. We always talk about patient journey, which is obviously essential and central to everything. But there's the journey on the other side of the coin too, and different things working for employees throughout their careers. So love that we've pulled that into this conversation. But looking at both sides of it, so patient outcomes, health system operational outcomes, what outcomes are we seeing as a result of these remote care programs? And can anyone give a real world example of impact for patient or for staff? First, I'd like to hear from Amber on this one. What are your thoughts on the outcomes?
I mentioned one earlier, just with our OB hypertensive patient population that's on remote patient monitoring program. That one is extremely successful, and we're really proud of it. We had another one of our use cases for RPM included our cardiac rehab patients. And so, as we often hear in my digital health team, we'll follow a crawl, walk, run phased approach when we're introducing something new. So we have time to learn and iterate, optimize it, and then move forward with scaling. So in the crawl stage for our cardiac rehab patients, we decided to offer RPM only to the patients that declined in-person rehab. So we have this amazing new rehabilitation center just for our HVI patients. We certainly are encouraging them to do that first, but we had 114 in 2022 that said no to any additional rehab, to in-person rehab. Those were the ones that we then offered the remote patient monitoring rehab program, and they said yes.
Wow.
So we had 114 patients that would have done nothing otherwise upon discharge from the hospital that actually agreed and followed the program. And we had 0 readmissions in 2022 of all the patients in cardiac rehab that went through.
That is a huge gap closed.
It is a huge gap closed. So imagine now coming out of the crawl stage where we can walk and we can run, and expanding that reach, offering it to more patients, investing to be able to do that scaling is what we're really excited about.
That's outstanding, Amber.
I think cardiac rehab is a great example of how you often deal with stakeholder resistance, and you have to make the case in a different way. We're not saying that in-person doesn't have a huge role, but by incorporating virtual, are we allowing access for patients that wouldn't have had it? Or are we giving them a pathway to independence to continue their rehab after their 36 sessions? Right now they're at home. We don't want their rehab to stop the second they leave the facility. So using these monitoring and virtual tools as a way to retain them, extend the length of time, make them more independent. But I think that's a great example of how you do have to convince some stakeholders to do what should seem obvious.
Well, and this is just a little piece, but think about their families and how grateful they are. Having them. My mother had AFib for years that ended up in CHF, and as her daughter in the last 4 years of her life, it was a huge burden and on my time, and I was happy to do it. But if I could have had programs like this helping her, I would have had more of my free time for my own family back. I would have not been as anxious about her, more obviously higher, employee satisfaction too, right? So think about what you've done for those families and those caregivers and that.
Yeah, mitigating some of that really massive stress and burden during hard times is essential to advancing the experience and elevating patient and, like you said, staff experience as well. Great points. Justin, again, I'd like to pull you in here with this next question. These programs are a vital part of them is the technologies that support them. So I'd love to hear from you which technologies and services have emerged as critical in delivering remote care and providing these advantages that we've described.
Sure. So I think about this in terms of going from the access of the data, that the portfolio of devices can monitor these patients continues to broaden and broaden over time. First from kind of asynchronous point data acquisition. Now we're into that continuous monitoring to drive into those higher acuity models that we can now support. I think the flip side of that is as the amount of data is coming up, the ability to monitor it in an effective manner that doesn't drive staffing through the roof is the flip side of that. And we think about kind of the improved algorithms of how do we monitor more data by keeping the patient ratios either consistent or driving them even higher so that we can monitor more patients more effectively by introducing that AI component. I think Claudia and someone else also mentioned kind of logistics hurdle. I'm also optimistic around both ours, but other solutions that include logistics as kind of the total platform of remote patient monitoring so that you make an order and you then can rely upon that order to be executed no differently than how we've executed it within the hospital systems, coordinating that care, coordinating the companies who are many times mom and pop organizations to make sure that they are delivering the care that you kind of expected. And then the last part is logistics around kind of the inventory, making sure that you have the right devices on staff, you have the right IVs, et cetera, being delivered to the bedside again so that you can execute no differently than you would have within the walls of your hospital.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we definitely did not cover supply chain in medical school, but I never would have guessed I'd spend so much time in meetings with supply chain nerds, and I love them. but an underappreciated aspect of doing this stuff.
And we take it for granted within the walls of the hospital that this stuff will just get delivered. We don't think about inventory. When we move this outside the walls, we have to be more cognizant because we're not the only ones who are providing that care. We have to make sure we've got the right parties at the table.
Right. And you have to think about the different workflows involved and really integrate into those different workflows, whether it's supply or clinical or the various things. Data isn't very useful if it's adding burden. Of course, we already have so much administrative burden in healthcare. Claudia, I'd love to hear your take on the technologies that are really helping remote care go to the next level and building the confidence that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, sure. I think a crucial thing absolutely has to be that the consumer has to want to engage in it. So if it's difficult to use, or it takes me 2 hours to set up and I'm confused, and then every time I have to remind myself it's not going to be accepted, right? So the easier it is for the patient and their caregivers to use, the better. And I think one of the things I know, Justin, with your company is you have continuous monitoring, you have intermittent, you have patient self-reported. Pulling all that in together is really important because you don't just want necessarily some of the things that are coming off your wearables. You want to also hear how that's working for the patient, and anything, especially as you get into the Medicare or the dual eligible population, anything around their caregivers that help them too is going to be really important. So making sure, I also think the more we can get away from point solutions and having 14 things to think about, the better. So the more that things are integrated and we're able to kind of have that in as much of a one-stop shop, and for caregivers too, the better. So those are some really important things that I would add in.
Yeah, just to expand on that last part around patient engagement, the solutions that can provide a seamless patient experience from hospital at home or timely discharge into that post-acute monitoring, and then transition them to a chronic care single application, those are the solutions that win because they don't have to relearn the system. They don't have to think about another application. They're plugged in, they understand it, especially at that time of kind of acute need, and it just becomes a place for them to go to continue to enhance their care.
Yeah, we're really talking about how to make sure patients can realize the full benefits of remote care and the technologies involved in that. Sarah or Amber, do you have any thoughts to add on how we can get that appreciation on the patient side and make sure that it's easy and not 14 different point solutions? Sarah?
Yeah, I think this is just a small piece of one way of thinking differently. So for years when you were doing virtual, digital, remote monitoring, there was this mindset of, well, we have to have them sign a consent, and if they don't want it, they can opt out. And it almost felt like you were apologizing for what you were trying to do. And we really pivoted that to overhaul our whole consent form to highlight all of the ways that we were looking after our patients and to explain to them, this is how we look after you. And to talk to them about the data and to talk to them about their privacy and to show them how these tools were helping us look after them, so that it's no longer you can opt out because but rather this is part of how we provide care. And it's a small thing, but it did avoid us having to do the update a new consent form every time we add a piece of technology. So that education and awareness and leading with our innovation rather than apologizing for it, I think is an important piece. And Claudia is absolutely right. Like if it's not convenient, no one's going to use it. And so I was joking recently about just like there's the 3 R's that aren't really R's in school, maybe there's the 4 F's of monitoring: features, form, function, and affordability. But I do think you have to drill in to understand the grade. Is this a consumer grade thing or is this a medical grade thing? Is this a device that I can only use for one use case? I think Amber was talking earlier about trying to really build something custom, and she's right, but you also have to try to look for hero products and hero platforms that will maybe get you 80% of the way there with most of your patients, and then you add little customizations on top of it, as opposed to having 4 different things that kind of do the same stuff that are tweaked and bespoke for 4 different populations. So at least that's how we're thinking about it, is what are platforms and tools that we can use in as many settings as possible.
Yep, and removing any layers of complexity where you can. Amber, let's hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I ditto to Dr. Fletcher. Our part of our criteria in looking at our technology solutions that we are considering is exactly how many ways can we use this? Where all can we apply? And how much flexibility does a platform have? And for us, it's very platform focused and certainly not point solution. So identifying those strategic partners that offer a platform that can be appropriately configured and designed for the particular use cases and needs that you have, but still be one underpinning backbone is certainly ideal. And that is the kind of one of those, the leading criteria that we look at. There are point solutions on every corner and 5 deep. And it is quite overwhelming as the digital health representative for a health system to fend off all of those inquiries. And quite frankly, it's just not part of our vision to continue down that path. And so those who have accomplished a flexible platform, an architecture that allows for some dynamic changes to it and certainly flexibility. That's the type of backbones that we're looking for and the capabilities that we have. And to the question around patient satisfaction and adoption and utilization, one thing that I try at every opportunity I can to remind folks and to introduce that absolutely the patient is paramount in thinking of them. But in my mind, it's a Venn diagram with patient and provider right smack in the middle. Because if that care team is disenchanted and not bought in to the conversation earlier around buy-in and change management and support, if that care team is not on board and sees the value, they are not going to recommend it to the patient that you are trying to put it in the hands of. So it really has to be a very balanced solution and design for both patient and provider, and there will be some compromises to be made, right, to walk that line, and that's okay, but that's where you're going to be able to be successful and move forward. And so I would remind folks to have your clinical partners walking with you, and I would suggest to those who are the technology vendors and providers out there to ensure that you are consulting very closely with clinical expertise, either within your team or in some form or fashion, to ensure the clinical soundness of what it is that you're proposing. There's quite a bit of uniqueness there that is very important to have as a part of your solution. And I've seen many technology vendors miss the mark because that is not a component that they've prioritized in their design and their build.
Yeah, great points. And I think that ties together a lot of the different things we've touched on today. You also mentioned vision and what is actually part of your vision going forward, which is a perfect segue to my final question before we transition into Q&A. So audience, please keep those questions coming in. We have a lot of great ones in the queue already. So thank you for that. But my last question before we transition into that, this will be for everyone. So looking to the future, what do you think is next for remote care programs? Sarah and Amber for your systems, and then Claudia and Justin for healthcare overall. Sarah, I'll start with your vision for your system and remote care.
Yeah, and I'll be fast and lazy. It's really more. It's more faster and more better. I mean, we have so many tools. It's really just comes down to integrating them in, changing workflows, scale, and getting them out there. And I think at the end of the day, everything we've talked about in terms of goals, to me, it all boils down to time. either we're trying to give the patient more time alive or quality time, or caring about, are there 5 clicks in their experience or 1 click in their experience? Are we giving the bedside team back some time by automating or centralizing effort? It all comes down to giving people increments and units of time. So at least from a vision perspective, that's the North Star for me. And I can aim that at just about any clinical problem or setting of care.
Yeah, more. I love it. Amber, how about your vision?
Yeah, I'll choose one to share, and that really is access for us. So driving access through creative virtual means and delivering what I mentioned for hybrid care models that are easily available and accessible, either by the patient services coordinator that's answering the phone and doesn't have a same-day appointment for you in that clinic, but can offer it elsewhere, to the busy mom who wants to self-serve and get in queue for an on-demand visit with her sick baby at 11 o'clock at night. Integrating the offering for self-service or scheduling so that we can have a very robust offering. We can always see you, and we can reduce the wait times that we are experiencing. That for us is paramount, and that's really, it boils down to access using creative hybrid care models and finding ways that we can refer to one another internally in a system so that we can get you in to see someone as soon as you need to.
Yeah, I think you brought in a word that I think is underused in these conversations. We always say innovation, which is great. You said creativity in hybrid models, and I love that. That's fantastic. Claudia, what's your vision for remote care delivery and in healthcare overall?
Yeah, thanks, Angie. So echoing what Sarah and Amber just shared and Justin has shared, I think one of the big things is thinking about, if we keep ourselves focused on how kind of the golden rule and how we would like to be treated, if we unfortunately have to be a patient, but hopefully as an individual, and we stay focused on that. And we also look, I do a lot of global work. We look at what other countries are doing too, and not just think about how we're doing it. I think really thinking about those pieces and understanding what's going on, let's say in Denmark, or what's going on in the Middle East that's very transformative, and how do we bring that here within our structure and obviously our regulatory constraints and other pieces, but just kind of broadening our minds and thinking about the art of the possible, and staying focused on the workforce we just talked about, but also what do caregivers want, what do consumers want, how can we, some people need to really think about how they're going to disrupt themselves before they're disrupted. We know there's a lot going on, and we haven't talked too much about like retail care and the other pieces, but you don't want to be, it might be a big visual for you, but a frog in a pot, right? You don't want to wait till the temperature's so hot that you're in a situation that you can't get yourself out of. So, and I do anticipate that. So I think some of these forward-thinking organizations really kind of jumping in and disrupting themselves a little bit more before they need to, it will serve them well in the long run. So I'm just thinking about that, and I like what Sarah said, kind of just continuing on current state. It doesn't have to be, change needs to happen in a certain way, and we don't have to get it out too far ahead of our skis, but how do we incrementally keep going and pushing that envelope?
Yeah, it's evolution to kind of stave off being disrupted in ways that you don't, complete upheaval. So great points. Justin, our tech-minded, maybe more technical answer here, but what is your vision for the future of remote care delivery in healthcare?
So I'll steal from Sarah's and Amber's. I think from a access point of view, the diversification of solutions, we talked about kind of the plethora of individual single-use case solutions that are out there. As those get combined, the innovation around the kind of the care models as well as the technology to support those models is super interesting to me. And the second one is around kind of that time and how do we improve the use cases and the experiences for physicians, for patients by applying more automation, more AI tools to the mix so that anything that can be automated out should be automated out. And so we give back that time to the clinicians, back to the patients to go do something else and improve themselves or something for the organization. That's where I'm really excited about for us as within healthcare.
Yes, definitely lots of exciting things happening. And I'm excited to open this up to audience Q&A. So audience, if you haven't already, please submit your questions in the chat and don't forget to press send so we can see them. The first question that I'll take from the audience here is artificial intelligence is a term that gets thrown around a lot in materials and articles about remote care and hospital at home. So the question for the panelists, how do you see AI being an enabler to improved patient and provider experience? Claudia, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one because you've talked about both sides of that coin a lot here.
Sure. And I can't wait to hear what Sarah and Amber Justin have to say too. Gosh, that's a hot topic.
With you just to spice it up, Claudia. So whatever you
got PowerPoint, counterpoint. Okay, I love that about you. So it's such a hot topic, right? And I think for me, the biggest thing is kind of that next best action. So I've been working on a project for over a year with our cloud and digital team and our digital twin group. And one of the best things that is coming into that is, first of all, we all know we have broken sick care systems, right? If we want to move to wellness, we're going to have this Cambrian explosion of data, right? And how are we going to parse that data? How are we going to give the right alerts at the right time? And the apex challenge in healthcare is behavior change. So as you're looking at that, how do you pull in the next best action, right? So I know I have diabetes, let's say, and I don't have diabetes, but I don't ever, I want to keep myself from getting there. So how do I make sure that what is my next best action? How do I know that I could be at more risk? How do I know that my labs are the right labs? How do I know that my provider's ordering more specific labs than just general ones? Those kind of things. So what is that? And getting that in the hands of the consumer so they can be informed and ask the right questions and really keep their health. And for those that want to be engaged, right? And so I think AI can be an amazing thing for people that want to be engaged that currently, frankly, don't have enough information to know how to prevent disease. So that's a big thing in AI for me.
Huge. Yeah. Sarah, what are your thoughts on AI and its impact?
Yeah, I mean, I get asked all the time by people of all ages, not in healthcare, oh, what do you think about this AI, creepy and worrisome. And, again, dumbing it down to my level, I view it like there is not nearly enough intelligence in healthcare. So I'll take more. I don't care if it's artificial, augmented, virtual, we need more. And I'd actually say the same about the scary disruptors. Quite frankly, there are some frogs that could use a little warm water. And I see any opportunity to bring efficiency and a hospitality mindset to healthcare as welcome. I also think healthcare is a lot harder than some of the disruptors might think. So I'm also kind of like, come on in, there's your apron. It's time to serve Thanksgiving dinner. So from my perspective, I welcome all of it. But you're right, Claudia. I think in terms of data and information, we don't have nearly enough, yet we have too much. And so kind of trying to balance that dichotomy is important. And one of the projects that we are just recently rolling out is wearables that allow vitals redesign in the hospital. And so on the one hand, it was not enough before. We only went in every 6 hours to collect vitals, yet we were waking patients up all night long, the same way we've been doing for 100 years. So it was too much, yet not enough. And so by bringing in these monitoring technologies, we're able to reimagine how we're looking after patients in the hospital, how we can look after patients when they go home, and utilizing AI to find that sweet spot of new insight in a way that saves everyone time and looks after everybody better. So I say bring on the AI and bring on the disruptors, but I know that's controversial, but I'm mostly just trying to see if I can start a fight in our last few minutes.
Yeah, with the 45 seconds left, we're gonna start a brawl here.
Yep.
Unfortunately, we do only have a few seconds left, so I'm gonna have to wrap it there. I think we've really covered a lot of ground today, and I appreciate all of your insights. Sarah, Amber, Claudia, Justin, you've been a fantastic panel, and I thank you. And thank you to Bioformis for sponsoring today's webinar. With a connected technology platform, Bioformis partners with health systems and risk-bearing organizations to revolutionize the delivery of remote care at home across the continuum. Bioformis is bringing the right care to everyone, everywhere. Audience, a recording will be made available after this event concludes. Thank you all for joining us and being so engaged. Have a good rest of your day. Take care, everyone.